Forest Rangers, what are your unexplainable and downright creepy stories? Story 1. One of my best buds from college was a geologist major that ended up becoming a ranger in the southeast US. Haven't spoken in years, as is the case with age, but I remember about 8 to 9 years back he was telling me about an old married couple that he had recently helped out. He had seen them come to the park several days in a row, and found out they were visiting from out west, and they had gotten engaged there decades prior. They had been searching for a spot. They'd taken pics of where he popped the question but were having trouble. After looking at the pics and figuring out roughly where they were trying to get to, he escorted them in his vehicle, then hiked with them to where he thought it would be. They found it, and he left them there and went back to his station at the entrance. He said he got a weird feeling once he got back, and felt like he needed to wait to see them whenever they left. Well, once it came time to lock up at night, he still hadn't seen them leave, so he reported it, left his assistant to wait at the shack at the entrance, and went back to where he left them. He found both of them lying down spooning along the bank of the river. Neither were alive. He called the cops, went through the 9 yards, and went home. The police were able to disclose to him their identities, but weren't sure anything else initially. Later he learned that the wife was terminally ill with cancer, and they had both committed suicide by ingesting some sort of chemical pill combination medley. They just chose to do it where they had gotten engaged at. My bud wasn't torn up about it. He was obviously sad for about them dying, but said that he thought they hadn't asked for help earlier because they didn't want anyone to think they helped kill them. Story 2. I have a friend who is a trail ranger, basically a ranger who can't get you in trouble. He told me about this time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking down hunting stands, feeders, and blinds with another actual ranger. The other ranger wasn't feeling well, so he said he was going to head back as it's a 1-hour ATV ride. Friend finished up the last one when he heard voices. Keep in mind he's far off the beaten path. He called out and no one replied. As it was getting dark, he started to head back and found that his ATV wouldn't start. He then noticed that the battery was not connected anymore. He reconnected it and started to drive, but it wasn't going fast at all. Less than a half-mile later the whole thing died. He radioed back basically saying, "Hey guys, I need someone to come pick me up." They told him they would, but it would be an hour. He asked if the other guy got back and they said no. He settled down and started a small fire, but before long he heard voices again. It's dark, he's not happy. The voices sound like an argument now. Someone was angry and yelling at someone else who sounded more scared. He called out and asked if anyone needed help. The voices didn't seem to care. He guessed they had to be less than 1,000 feet away. He radioed again, and they said they were having trouble finding what path he might be on and haven't left yet. He asked them just to get the other ranger to tell them about where they are because he left with the iPad that had the map. They said he still isn't back. About 3 more minutes go by and he hears the voices start up again. He decides to walk to them hoping maybe they can stop being drunk and maybe have a map. He walked in their direction, but the voices seemed to be getting further as he got closer. Finale, after 20 minutes he gave up and walked back. He got a radio call and they said the other guy was found passed out covered in vomit and was being taken to the hospital, but he crossed off everywhere they found a stand so they have a general idea where he is. Then the radio died. Then the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decided to listen to what they were arguing about, picking up things like, "Well, it wasn't yours to take, I don't care, you knew better," and so on. His guess was 2 hunters arguing over a kill. Then he heard the one shout something intelligible. Then silence. The bang a gunshot. He doused his fire and hid. After that he heard nothing, just his breathing for the next half hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up everything and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours and found nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour a shallow grave was found and in it was a long dead man who had clearly been shot in the face. Thing was, it was a skeleton who was there for years, so either the argument he heard just ended with a bang and both parties went home last night, or he heard the murder of someone from years ago. Story 3. I have so many of these, but I'll share my favorite. I have been a ranger in the USFS for almost 15 years, but this takes place about 3 years after I joined. We were getting calls about a lone wolf with a collar on hanging around campsites. Weird, since wolves aren't known to be in the area, but when you work in the field long enough you start to realize anything is possible. No calls had mentioned violent behavior from the animal, thank God. I departed from the station around noon to check out the places that had been sighted, wandered around for about 3 hours, no further calls during that time until I took a break for water, sat down, had a snack, drank some water and was getting ready to go again when the thing was about 20 feet out, trotting near the tree line. It seemed friendly and had the collar, so I whistled to it and he came over to me. Getting a closer look, I could see it wasn't a wolf. It was huge, but it was dark and didn't have the right body structure, though I could see why it'd be confusing from a distance. I radioed in and reported that I had the dog with me, but as soon as I said ID bring it in, the dog took off like he was playing, to see how far he could get me to chase him. Typical dog behavior. I went after it, and I swear it was a game of chase for at least 5 minutes as we steadily ran through the forest. Please don't go running through woods unless you know the area like the back of your hand. The dog finally slowed down near a rock bed creek area, and started pacing around a spot. I drew closer and didn't see anything off at first, then I noticed that the overgrowth had almost disguised what appeared to be bones. I called it in immediately, and another team was sent to recover the remains. When I went to retrieve the dog he was just gone. But honestly, it wasn't a priority at that point. He was friendly enough, and I figured we'd catch up with him later. The bones were identified as a teenage male's, died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. had been reported missing in the area long before I became a ranger, and there'd been pretty much no hope of finding him. I spoke to his mom on the phone. She called to thank me personally, and she asked how ID found her son. I mentioned the black dog, then thought ID said something wrong since there was a pause on her side of the line. After I gave a couple details about the dog, she quietly explained that her son, who struggled with making connections, had sunken into a deep depression after the death of his best friend. The very dog that led me to him. I think I spent the rest of the day stunned. I continue to be in disbelief in a way, but I know what happened. Also throwaway account because my main would give away who the individual in this post is and where it took place. The family still grieves for their son. Story 4. Not a ranger, but I lived on the outskirts of a national park in a cabin. It was a 4-mile drive from the main road just to get to the property, and we had no plumbing or power. This property was right next to where the park started. To call it the middle of nowhere is an understatement. My roommate at the time was interning with the Park Service, but he is a city kid. Every evening at the dead of night I had been hearing noises in the woods, what I thought was someone walking, but then they just stop in particularly overgrown areas of the jungle, so your mind starts to doubt itself. Is it a pig, a cat? Is it just the wind? The cabin didn't have a locking door, and the owners didn't want me to install one, so I began sleeping in my car. Now, this is a huge property, and Idaho parked my car over an acre away from the cabin, and where I was hearing something, I started hearing those footsteps again. I moved out. My roommate, who thought I was bonkers, stayed and still slept there without a locking door. He got robbed, not once, but twice after I moved out, so he finally put up motion-triggered cameras. There was a man with a long rifle hood hike up to the property, set up in the bushes, and watch us. Story 5. Not a ranger, but I was out camping with my dog one night along the Mogollon Rim of Arizona. It was dark and we were sitting around the campfire when we hear something behind a bush close to our camp. Instead of my dog barking at it, he begins to whimper. I didn't think nothing of it and just tended to the fire. After a couple of minutes we were some more noises from a different bush. This time my dog gets up and goes over to the tent and scratches the door because he wants to go in. I toss a couple of rocks in the direction I heard the noise and nothing happened. I'm spooked now, so I toss a couple of pieces on the fire and climb into my tent with my dog, hoping that the light from the fire would keep whatever was out there away. We eventually fall asleep and luckily had no other disturbances during the night. The next morning, I go out behind the bushes where we had heard the noises and found mountain lion tracks that were circling around our camp. I'm sure glad I didn't go looking at night when I heard the noises. Story 6. Not a ranger, but I used to be in a group that's somewhat like the Scouts, so we spent a lot of time in the woods and some weird happened often, but most of the time it was easy to explain. One thing happened though that to this day scares the living out of me. I was a leader for the age group 8 to 10 years old and we were out on a camping trip. It was the first year we stayed on that terrain and it was huge. Normally we tend to explore the majority of a terrain before the kids arrive, so we were aware of any possible dangerous spots to avoid. This time it was impossible. Every camp we have what we call a night game. It's usually a scary game in which the kids have to complete several tasks while the leaders scare the ever-loving out of them. Obviously we had one too during that camp. We masked up as monsters and hid out in the woods close to the checkpoints they had to pass. While running in between checkpoints, I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide besides behind trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight or they'd be able to see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes and you start imagining things that aren't real. During my stay there I saw a shadow that was around my size running past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I just assumed I was imagining things because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end and I saw the shadow again. This time I could see it vaguely standing near a tree not too far away from me. I thought it was one of the other leaders hiding to scare kids and decided to go over there as it was about time to go back. I aimed my flashlight towards the tree, and while getting closer I noticed that there was indeed someone standing there dressed in what looked like a torn burlap sack and had their head covered with a few white plastic bags that looked like they were tied together. I started to feel pure dread. Something felt really off. I asked if everything was okay, but they didn't respond. The only thing I heard was this weird sound that sounded like someone knocking on. Nevertheless I went a bit closer until I was about 10 meters away from this person. The knocking sound turned out to be that person smacking his head repeatedly into the tree, and I noticed he looked like a male. He was barefoot and his arms and legs were covered with crusted mud. His hands were in a weird cramped position. I was convinced this was just one of the other leaders pulling a prank, so I told them to knock it off. He slowly turned his head and started walking towards me. Something inside me just told me to run. It didn't matter if it was just a stupid prank, and I ran away scared for nothing. If this wasn't a prank it felt like I was in serious danger, so I ran as fast as I could. I heard him running after me, but I didn't want to turn around to look as I'd probably run into a tree. I arrived back at the campsite and every single person that could be dressed like that was already there. They couldn't have gotten there before me, and if they did they sure as didn't have the time to change into their regular clothes. Still, I told them and that they gave me a good scare with that. They just looked weird at me, thinking I was trying to scare them, and we left it at that. Next day I wanted to go check it out. Who knows, maybe some weirdo ate the wrong mushroom and might be out there dying from hypothermia. I took someone else with me just in case, and there was nothing but endless trees. We arrived at the tree where I saw the person banging his head and there was a dead-skinned, decomposing rabbit nailed to the tree. We called the cops. They looked around quickly and brushed it off as just a prank from another scouting group or some kids from the nearby town and left it at that. We didn't notice anything weird after that, so it probably was a dumb prank. But seriously, some people have a up sense of humor. Edit, this has had a lot more responses than I thought. To clarify, I'm 99% sure it was a prank by locals. The cops reacted in a way that looked more like not this bullshit again than oh no, evil murderer in the woods and we want stop it. Story 7, small chance and the cause of one ranger's story from about a decade or so ago. Was hunting public land with my dad, several miles from anything close to a trail, so the day goes by and not much is going on, weather is shitty and I'm not hearing distant gunshots, so I reckon the deer aren't moving much. I radio to the old man that I'm gonna head back, and we make plans to rendezvous where we had split up that morning. 20 or so minutes later, I was kneeling around the edge of a pond, stripping off all my bulky camo layers. I was just around, putting stuff in my bag while I listened to my earphones. I can't remember if I had taken my blaze orange hat off or not to remove my pullover, but I had all the appropriate gear to denote myself as a hunter in my possession. As I was digging through my bag, I thought I heard that faint bass of someone yelling, so I took an earbud out and noticed that crouched on the opposite edge of the pond, there was a lone forest ranger kinda just watching me. I stood up, but didn't wave, and I wasn't sure he had even yelled to me in the first place, so I didn't holler anything to him. We just kinda locked eyes for what felt like a few minutes. To be clear, we weren't doing anything illegal. My rifle was unloaded by that point, though slung over my shoulder, obscuring the fact the action was open and we're following all laws and regulations. I hunched back over to my bag, pulled out my walkie and radioed to my dad, "We've got company." My motives weren't nefarious. I just didn't want my dad to come bumbling down the hill and be surprised by a friendly law enforcement officer. When I looked back up, maybe 15 seconds later, that ranger was gone. I mean flat the out gone. So eventually I meet back up with my dad and start to tell him about what happened. Yeah, as deep back in here as we are, he probably thought we were up to no good, and hit the trail when he saw you on a radio. They get ambushed like that. As someone who gets nervous, anxious, around cops, it never occurred to me that I could be causing similar anxiety in them. If you're reading this DNR bro, I'd like to offer you a heartfelt my bad, and keep up the good work. Story 8, I was in the Gila wilderness and a convoy of us campers fishers were making the drive on the dirt road from Mogollon to Snow Lake when we spotted a forest ranger guy pulled over looking in a ditch. Turns out some idiot tried to make a U-turn and didn't realize the loose rock makes it hard to stop. They went over the edge and high-centered. We're miles from the nearest official campground and it's early spring and the nighttime gets pretty cold. We get a jeep with a winch in position and start to pull the guy out of the ditch. Off a hill comes a white dude in a purple velvet sweatsuit. He's got a walking stick, pack and the purple velvet sweatsuit, that's it. He's a blonde dude and pretty skinny. He comes up to us and he tells us he's German and having a great time. We could not get over the purple velvet suit. It was like a real pimp sweatsuit. The ranger is immediately suspicious. Wants to know where's he staying and where he came from. It was around 900 in the morning and the only way he could have gotten where he came from was to hike for hours. The German guy's is a goofy and just points off toward the other mountain when asked where he's staying going. We all think it's funny, but also question how the guy is getting along with no water and no food. The sun is intense above 5,000 feet, even if it's only 75 degrees. The German guy refuses water or any other help and just crosses the road, goes off into the woods. The ranger told us he can't really keep the guy from doing that since he seemed okay. He said he'd check a few campsites in that direction later to see if he made it. We get to Snow Lake and commence drinking like fish in order to better catch fish. That evening the ranger pops by to tell us that nobody at any other camp had seen the dude. He radioed around and no other rangers had abandoned camps or missing campers, and they surely hadn't seen a German dude in purple pimp sweatsuit. That range rolled off duty the next day and his replacement came by to make sure the other ranger was smoking something we gave him. We assured him it all happened. Never heard another word about the German in the purple pimp sweatsuit, but makes for a good story. Edit, forgot a word update, thanks for all the interest. I texted my buddy that was with me that day to reminisce about the German, and he reminded me that the purple pimp German looked a lot like the actor Rhys Ifans who played Nigel the Kicker in the Keanu Reeves classic The Replacements. Hope that helps with the mental image. The movie came out like 3 years after the camping trip, but we remember seeing the movie and thinking Nigel looked just like the crazy German. My friend reiterated how absolutely happy the German was. Story 9, not a ranger but my uncle was. He always told the story of when he worked in Montana. He was a solid 5 to 10 miles away from town, so pretty much deep in the woods. He recalled pulling his ATV on top of a semi-big hill that overlooked a valley. In between all the trees there was this clearing he could see through his binoculars. Through them he saw an older lady 60-ish in black surrounded by 6 to 8 wolves. Now, he is a lengthy distance from the woman but he starts yelling and honking and all that and takes off down the hill as fast as he could, but when he reached the clearing there was no one there. No wolves, no woman, only a silver ring with a black stone in the middle. He still has it to this day. Story 10, I made a post on Let's Not Meet when I first got on Reddit about some odd experiences that happened when a friend and I were out camping. There were belongings from someone else at our campsite on my land. We saw someone walking around in our field, and when we went to bed we heard someone walking around our fire and putting in, like they were trying to keep warm. I racked my shotgun I had with me and told them they better off. They ran off. Over the course of a few weeks we had stuff go missing and a chainsaw we had locked up in our tractor we were using stolen. Since then, nothing else has happened thankfully, but I do have some other weird stories about in the woods. Weird stuff out there, folks. Edit for more spooky stories. A memorable one is from when a friend and I were out fishing on the river in a little John boat. We're sitting there relaxing and the sun is starting to go down. The crickets are starting to chirp. All of a sudden we hear a loud splash behind us and toward the opposite bank. We see the end of the splash and watch for a few more seconds. Then we see it. This rock comes hurling down the riverbank and into the water. Near us, not tumbling, being thrown. And these aren't little stones either. They're probably about the size of a bowling ball. We could hear movement in the underbrush but couldn't see anything as there wasn't a lot of light. We kind of laughed it off, but whoever it was threw 5 or 6 more rocks over the course of a few minutes. We finally decided to call it a day when one of them got a little too close. Story 11. To be clear, I am not forestry. I just have a related story. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana-Wyoming area, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoff to ensure no contaminants. So I thought that sounded fun and wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to have to camp out there for 2 nights, so we packed up all our gear in saddlebags or saddle bundles and started out. The first day and night was amazing, beautiful scenery and amazing air quality. It really is so peaceful out there. I love that area and wish I got to go up there more often. Anyway, we started out on the second day and my cousin said, "You want to see something weird?" Of course I said yes, so she led me on a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling about 2 hours away from our actual path we had laid out. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse, too. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing, and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and bring our little rechargeable radio. It is one of those you can plug in or wind up, and it also acts as a lantern if you really need it to. But that kills the batteries quickly. I do, and out in the middle of nowhere, there is a huge coil of wire sticking out of the ground. The wire itself was not weirdly large, like some buried transmission wire, but small like 10 or 12 gauge wiring for a house. It trailed off into the brush and trees, so naturally I decided to follow the thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming straight up from the ground, is strung across limbs of trees then back to the ground. Then it snakes around rocks and finally deadens into an outlet. That outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a school teacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo-plastic top thing. No chair, no building, no nothing. Just this outlet and this desk. I am staring confused as all at this desk in the middle of a forest when my cousin takes the radio, pulls out the cord, and plugs it into the outlet. That then lit up and started blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now the place where we were had no road access, no buildings for many miles, and no other people around. And yet there was a live outlet, weird as, no spooky jump scares or bodies, just one lone power desk in the middle of the woods. I wish I had taken a picture of it. Story 12. This is gonna get buried as I'm late to the party, but I worked for a few months as a park ranger with the Florida Forest Service at my local state forest. The creepiest thing I saw was a poor young man who hung himself on my second week on the job. The unexplainable, though, are obviously not as cut and dry. What of children's clothes neatly folded and left on the trails, pairs of shoes in the middle of our dense burn blocks, and just a general sense of eeriness. My first few weeks on the job I was easily spooked, but after I got into my groove of spending hours alone in the woods, it took a lot to shake me. When the forest goes silent, pack up and move along. Story 13. Not a ranger, but like probably all the rest of the comments are going to be, I was camping in the woods. Backwoods campground with the nearest sign of humanity was a National Guard depot about 5 miles away. It was the week before Labor Day and the campground was completely empty. We were half asleep in our tent when we heard what sounded like a little girl laughing in the distance. It continued for about an hour. Didn't get much sleep that night, Edit Mystery explained. Apparently it was called a magpie and not a demon girl. Story 14. I'm a ranger non-peace officer and work at a pretty remote desert park. This happened before I got there, but the other rangers I work with were there. They went to do a patrol during summer our off-season at one of our seldom used campgrounds. On a patrol, our maintenance ranger found a burnt-out car in one of the sites. The desert is a weird place, so he just calls the sheriff and waits. Sheriff arrives and it turns out there's a body in the driver's seat, with no arms and no legs, just a torso and head burnt. Sheriff's just marked it as a suicide and removed the vehicle. We are close to Mexico and get a lot of legal drug traffic. So I guess they don't even bother trying to solve those. Super sketchy. Story 15. Not a ranger, but hey, race a Goodwood story. It's late spring, heavy rain had flooded the dike and public hunting grounds, so I get the idea to go fishing in the shallows with my buddy. We have a good time. Didn't catch anything and it's getting dark, so we light a fire to dry off before heading back. As the sunlight is swallowed up we hear something I can only describe as a blood-curdling scream coming from the distance. A little girl, almost frogs we thought, and kept talking, twigs snapping, then again, but much closer we heard it, could have been as close as 30 feet of the tree line. We hightail it out of there and laugh it off once we get home. Fast forward 6 years. I'm on lunch break and I'm telling this story to my lead, and he pulls up a video on YouTube and lets me listen. The same scream. He gives me the phone and I see a mountain lion. They make that noise as a final warning. Story 16. One time was visiting the Gila Wilderness. I'm from Germany and just walking through seeing all the amazing American lands, and I ran into a ranger and some American campers. I told them I was having a great time and went on my way, never saw them again. Story 17. I was the lone recreation ranger in a small district in southern Idaho. Nearest town from guard station was about 5 hours away by car. After moving into the guard station, solar power was not working, and I hadn't slept for about a month due to various factors: bats in the cabin, something walking on the deck at night. The woods there always had an eerie feeling to them, unlike the southwest ponderosa forest that I was used to. About 2 months into the seasonal job, I started to hear something walking and scratching on the deck at night, perhaps even on the door. Now this district was known for its badgers and beavers, so I didn't think much of it. When leaving the cabin at night, I always had an eerie feeling like I was being watched. One night, I was returning from my grocery run, always went on Tuesday nights, and I had a bad feeling. At the time, I did not have my shotgun in the vehicle. After stepping out of the vehicle, I looked to the right of the cabin, about 50 feet from my front door. All I could see were two eyes about 5 to 4 feet in the air. To say I freaked out was an understatement. I started yelling, "Get the out of here," but the eyes only crouched down and inched closer. At this point I could tell it was a large animal of some kind, definitely not a coyote. I tossed a piece of firewood in the general area and the creature leaped back a bit but did not make a sound. Tossed 4 or 5 more pieces and creature still inched forward. At this point I fumbled with the keys. Of course the solar power was out again. I managed to get inside and grab my shotgun. Technically, you are not supposed to have guns in gov housing, but who that lives in the hills have eyes backcountry and does not carry. Went outside, creature was a bit closer, still could not get a good look with my shitty headlamp, loaded shotgun and continued to throw pieces of with one hand. Finally the creature walked back into the brush. That night, I drank about 4 IPAs and slept with my shotgun. In the morning, trail crew came up and we found mountain lion tracks all over the porch, rocking bench, and compound leading back to the creek. After that event, I always heard the rocking chair move and someone or something walking on the porch, but never found any tracks after that point. Considering that it was always muddy up there, it was weird to not find any tracks. I've been stalked by mountain lions before and never had that eerie feeling like I did in those woods. Story 18. My mom worked for the forest in the last 70s. She worked the radio, I think. She said he heard her friend die in a forest fire over the radio. It isn't super strange, but it would be one of the worst things I can think happening to someone. Story 19. My cousin is a park ranger and told me this story. There was this woman that had gone missing in the forest. No biggie, it's a big place. Hell, just drive around till he finds her. For hours later they still didn't find her when he heard a blood-curdling scream. This guy had found the missing woman with her throat slit so deep my cousin wasn't sure what she had was even classified as a throat. He restrained the guy that found her and called the police. Sadly, however, there's nothing he or I could find about the subject, and my cousin didn't follow up on it after they arrested the guy, so for all I know he just found her and had nothing to do with it. Edit: I've been tired as all day. My grammar isn't the best. Read the story, it's readable. Stop complaining. Story 20. I told this story on Let's Not Meet, but I'm happy to tell it again. In 2016 my boyfriend, now my husband, and I went camping in eastern Pennsylvania. The place we decided to stop for the night was primitive. Camping was free, no cell service, barely a road, etc. We did encounter 2 other people. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so we'll describe them. The first was a woman who had her truck off to the side of the road a little as we drove past. She had the hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer to help. Usually my boyfriend had no problem helping someone, but he said his time something about her put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and usually people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she just expected we would stop. That's what my boyfriend said anyway. I hadn't really noticed anything that strange about her. The next person came when we had chosen a spot and were setting up a fire for hot dogs. I had noticed people drive by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out each time was the same car, and the man in the car watched us each time he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place we liked. It had been raining and everything was muddy and we wanted the driest site possible. He could have been doing the same thing. We briefly thought about moving, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks. There were some other tracks, but not many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come by another time, so we stayed and spent the several remaining hours before dark goofing off. No one else drove by. Whether or not those 2 had anything else to do with our experience, the real fear came later. We had gone to sleep in our tent, and sometime around 3 a.m. we were woken by this very loud noise. I can't describe it very well or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chain gun revving up. It was also similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel and played it over a loudspeaker, is another way he described it. He jumped up and looked out the little window but couldn't really see anything. The sound repeated itself another few times. I was too scared to speak, so my boyfriend whispered that it was probably miles off and I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. After we left he told me it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I probably should have wondered why he would bother to whisper if apparently the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We laid there for a while longer when finally my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I got alarmed by this, and even more alarmed when he unwrapped the machete we had bought just for this trip from its plastic before opening the tent. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing plenty of light I couldn't really see. I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed though before we got into the car. There was a beer can by our dead fire that hasn't been there before. We didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away my boyfriend explained that he was nervous someone might have been trying to lure us out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. He also half expected to find out gas tank had been siphoned out, but that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We joked that would make a funny hybrid commercial. Number of brutal murders avoided by driving a hybrid too. We only joked because we were about shitting ourselves from fear and adrenaline even then. The rest of our trip we only stayed in well-populated campsites or got a hotel.